My beloved child, there is a quiet realization moving through their thoughts now, and it is nothing like the certainty they once carried. For a long time, they believed there would always be another opportunity. Another conversation. Another chance to explain what they meant, another day when everything could somehow return to normal. But something has shifted. Your silence feels different to them now. Your energy no longer seems to be waiting at the same familiar doorway, and for the first time, they are beginning to wonder whether they waited too long. Stay a little longer, because what they are realizing is not simply that they miss you. It goes much deeper than that. They are afraid they may have lost the version of you who once believed this connection could become something beautiful. And here is where the story changes direction. They expected distance to make things easier. They thought time would soften everything, that unanswered questions would eventually disappear beneath ordinary life. Instead, distance became a mirror. Without your constant presence, they started noticing exactly what your presence had given them. The conversations that seemed ordinary suddenly became memorable. The kindness they once accepted without questioning became rare in comparison to everything around them. Even the smallest moments began returning to their mind with unexpected clarity. A sentence you said. A look they understood too late. A moment when you offered patience while secretly hoping they would finally meet you halfway. Don't skip this part, because the next realization is the one they were least prepared for. They did not only lose access to your attention. They may have lost your willingness to keep waiting. That possibility has changed something inside them. Now they are replaying choices they once defended. They are noticing the moments when pride spoke louder than honesty, when hesitation replaced action, when they assumed your heart would remain exactly where they left it. And suddenly a question keeps appearing: what if you have finally chosen yourself? Not as punishment. Not to make them chase you. Simply because you discovered that peace feels better than uncertainty. That thought is what unsettles them most, because they can understand anger. Anger can still mean attachment. But calm distance? Calm distance tells them you may be learning how to live without needing an explanation from them. Yet something unexpected is happening alongside that fear. They are no longer thinking only about getting you back. They are beginning to think about what would actually need to change if they were given another opportunity. That difference matters. Wanting someone is easy when loneliness arrives. Wanting to repair what was damaged requires something deeper: accountability, consistency, patience, and the courage to have conversations that were avoided before. And this person is slowly realizing that words alone may no longer reach you. If they want to work this out, they cannot return carrying the same behavior and expect a different ending. Stay till the end, because there is another layer beneath all of this. They have imagined reaching out more than once. In their mind, the conversation begins easily. They tell you everything they should have said before. They explain the hesitation. They admit where they misunderstood you. But then the imagined conversation reaches one moment that stops them completely: your response. They no longer know what you would say. Once, they felt they could predict your heart. Now they cannot. And strangely, that uncertainty is forcing them to see your value more clearly than familiarity ever did. There is something powerful about becoming unpredictable simply because you stopped abandoning yourself to maintain a connection. You did not need a dramatic departure. You did not need to prove anything. Sometimes transformation happens quietly. You begin protecting your time. You stop explaining the same feelings repeatedly. You stop chasing clarity from someone who must discover clarity within themselves. And while you are moving forward, they are finally looking backward with open eyes. But wait until you hear what they are beginning to understand about the future. They know that if they approach you again, the old version of the relationship cannot be the destination. Something new would have to be built. Slower. Clearer. More balanced. They would have to meet the person you are becoming, rather than expecting the person you used to be. And that realization is creating a decision they can no longer postpone. Because the question inside them is changing. It is no longer, will they wait for me? It is becoming, have I become someone worthy of another conversation? And the answer they are discovering may completely change what they do next. Something has begun to disturb the comfortable story they once told themselves. They used to believe that whenever they were ready, they could simply return, speak a few heartfelt words, explain the confusion, and find you standing somewhere close to where they left you. But now they sense that life has been moving you forward while they were still trying to understand themselves. And that realization has created urgency, not the loud kind, not desperation, but the quiet urgency that appears when someone finally recognizes that a meaningful connection cannot be placed on hold forever. They are afraid they have lost you, yes, but what surprises them even more is why they want to work this out now. It is not only because they miss your presence. They miss who they became when things between you felt genuine. Around you, they could imagine a calmer future. They could picture conversations without pretending, ordinary days that somehow felt significant, and a connection where being understood mattered more than appearing perfect. For a while, they underestimated that feeling. Now they are discovering how difficult it is to replace. And here is the part you might not expect: they have started questioning whether their hesitation was ever truly about you. Perhaps it was about what being close to you required them to confront within themselves. Real connection has a strange way of doing that. It reveals where someone is ready to grow and where they are still hiding behind old habits. You may have represented a future they wanted, while simultaneously reminding them that reaching that future would require change. So they hesitated. They overthought. They allowed small misunderstandings to become distance. But distance did not erase the truth. It amplified it. Stay a little longer, because this is where their private thoughts begin turning into intention. They are considering what they would actually say if they had one honest opportunity with you. Not a perfect speech. Not promises designed to impress you. Something simpler. Something closer to, I understand now why you became tired of waiting for clarity from me. Imagine how different that is from someone merely saying they miss you. Missing you centers their feelings. Understanding your experience means they are finally beginning to see yours. And that shift could determine everything that follows. They know you may not immediately trust what they say. In fact, part of them expects you to be cautious. They understand that one emotional conversation cannot repair every unanswered moment. So in their mind, they are beginning to move beyond words. Consistency. Showing up when they say they will. Listening without turning every difficult conversation into a defense. Giving you room to decide instead of expecting immediate reassurance. These are the things they are quietly considering because somewhere inside, they know that working this out cannot mean returning to the same cycle. It would have to mean creating something neither of you experienced before. And perhaps you needed this distance too, not because separation was the goal, but because clarity sometimes arrives only when the noise disappears. You have had space to remember your standards. Space to recognize that loving someone does not require losing yourself. Space to understand that another person's uncertainty should never become the measure of your worth. That is important, because if a conversation happens, you will not enter it as the person who once needed a particular outcome. You will enter it capable of choosing what actually feels healthy, mutual, and real. Don't skip what comes next, because there is one fear they have barely admitted even to themselves. They wonder whether somebody else will eventually recognize what they failed to appreciate quickly enough. Not because this is a competition. It isn't. Their deeper concern is that life does not freeze while someone decides what they want. You continue meeting people, discovering possibilities, building confidence, creating memories, and becoming more comfortable in your own direction. Every day they remain silent is another day you learn that you can move forward without them. That is the reality making them reconsider everything. And now, something is approaching a turning point. They have begun imagining not simply contacting you, but facing the uncomfortable questions that might follow. Why did you wait? Why were you unclear? What would actually be different this time? Those questions once would have made them retreat. Now they are beginning to understand that answering them may be the doorway to the very connection they are afraid of losing. If this message feels meaningful, you can share it with someone who might need this perspective, leave a comment with the thought that stayed with you, or subscribe and continue this journey with us. Because the next part goes somewhere deeper than whether they return. It reveals what happens when someone realizes that getting another chance and being ready for another chance are two completely different things. And this person may finally be preparing to prove which one they truly want. The strangest part is not that they want another chance, it is that they are finally beginning to understand what another chance would cost them. Not money. Not grand gestures. Not some dramatic display designed to sweep away everything that happened before. The real cost is much more personal. They would have to release the version of themselves that kept choosing hesitation over honesty. And that is where this story becomes different. Because somewhere between missing you and imagining life without you, they reached a realization they could no longer avoid. If they truly want to work this out, they cannot simply ask you to believe them. They have to become believable. That thought has been following them into ordinary moments. They think about reaching out, then stop themselves from sending something shallow. They imagine saying, "I miss you," but another thought interrupts. Is that enough after everything left unresolved? They consider explaining themselves, then recognize that explanations without change could sound like another circle leading nowhere. So their mind keeps returning to one question: what could I do differently this time? Stay with this, because that question matters more than any perfect sentence they could send you. For perhaps the first time, they are not only examining what happened between you. They are examining themselves inside what happened. They remember moments when you were asking for clarity and they responded with uncertainty. Moments when you needed consistency and they assumed there would always be more time. Moments when you were not asking for perfection at all, you were simply trying to understand where you stood. Looking back, those moments feel different now. What once seemed small suddenly carries weight because they can finally see the pattern connecting everything. And then came the realization they were not prepared for. You changed. Not into someone colder. Not into someone unreachable. You simply became less willing to negotiate with confusion. There is a difference. You started understanding that peace should not require constant decoding. You began recognizing that genuine connection should leave room for questions, but it should not make uncertainty the entire relationship. And perhaps without even announcing it, you started walking differently through your own life. More centered. More selective about where your emotional energy goes. They noticed. Maybe not immediately, but they noticed. The way you stopped trying to force conversations. The way your attention returned to your own world. The subtle sense that you were no longer waiting for them to determine what your future would look like. That is when the possibility of losing you stopped feeling theoretical. What if this moment changes the entire path? Because fear can make someone chase, but awareness can make someone grow. And what is developing inside them now seems closer to awareness. They are realizing that working things out does not mean convincing you to forget what happened. It means being willing to acknowledge it, learn from it, and create evidence that something has genuinely changed. Wait till the final moment, because there is another truth underneath their desire to reconnect. They are no longer certain you will say yes. And strangely, that may be exactly what they needed to understand. Your choice matters too. You are not the final scene in someone else's story, waiting patiently until they decide how the plot should end. You have your own direction. Your own standards. Your own future. If they approach you, they are beginning to understand that you have every right to listen carefully, move slowly, ask difficult questions, or decide that your path has changed. This realization is making their imagined conversation more honest. Instead of thinking, "How do I get them back?" they are beginning to think, "How do I show them that I finally understand?" That shift is enormous. Because love without understanding can become endless misunderstanding. Connection without communication can become guessing. And promises without consistent action eventually become background noise. They do not want to be background noise anymore. They want to become clear. Something important is waiting for you here. Their biggest fear may not actually be that you have stopped caring. Their biggest fear may be that you still care, but you have learned that caring alone is not enough to build the future you deserve. That possibility changes everything. Because if there is still a bridge between you, they know they cannot run across it demanding certainty. They would have to approach carefully. Respectfully. They would have to meet you where you are now rather than searching for the version of you who once tolerated more uncertainty. And somewhere in their mind, a different future is beginning to form. Not a fantasy where every problem magically disappears. Something quieter. Two people sitting across from each other without pretending. Questions finally being answered. Old assumptions being replaced with clarity. Boundaries being respected instead of misunderstood. No games. No guessing. No need for either person to shrink themselves just to keep the connection alive. Could that future happen? Perhaps. But there is something more important than predicting it. You do not have to chase it. If they genuinely want to work this out, the next meaningful step belongs to them as much as it belongs to you. Their intentions must eventually become visible through choices. Their realization must become consistency. Their fear of losing you must mature into respect for what keeping you in their life would actually require. And you? You continue becoming. Continue building the life that feels peaceful when nobody is validating it. Continue choosing relationships where your presence is appreciated rather than assumed. Continue remembering that being deeply cared for should never require you to abandon your own center. Because there is one final twist they are beginning to understand. They thought the greatest risk was losing you to someone else. It wasn't. The greatest risk was losing you to the stronger version of yourself who finally realized you could be happy without waiting for them. And now that they see it, they know the next move cannot be ordinary. A door they assumed would remain open has suddenly become something they know they must earn the right to approach. That is the realization changing their entire perspective now. Until recently, they were focused on whether you still had feelings, whether you remembered the good moments, whether some invisible thread between you remained untouched. But those questions are becoming less important because a more mature question has taken their place. Even if you still care, would you trust them with your heart again? And that question cannot be answered by nostalgia. It cannot be solved by reminding you of beautiful memories or telling you how much they have been thinking about you. Trust lives in the present. It watches behavior. It notices consistency. It listens to words, yes, but then waits quietly to see whether those words become reality. This person is beginning to understand that, and it is changing what they imagine doing next. They do not want to return with noise. They want to return with clarity. They do not want to overwhelm you with everything they suddenly feel. They want to create enough emotional safety for you to speak to. Because perhaps that was one of the missing pieces before, they were so occupied with their own uncertainty that they never fully understood what their uncertainty was creating inside you. Now they are imagining the conversation from your side. What would you need to hear? What would you need to see? What questions have remained unanswered for so long that you stopped expecting answers at all? Stay a little longer, because one of those questions may be more important than everything else. Why now? Why understand your value after distance appeared? Why become clear after you became tired of confusion? Why finally consider commitment when the possibility of losing you became real? They know you could ask that, and surprisingly, they are no longer searching for an impressive answer. The truth may be simpler. Sometimes people recognize the meaning of a connection while living inside it. Other times, familiarity makes them careless, and only distance reveals what they had stopped noticing. That does not automatically erase the past, but it can awaken someone to what must change if another chapter is ever written. And this person is standing near that realization. They are beginning to understand that missing you is not proof of transformation. Wanting you is not proof either. Even being afraid of losing you forever does not automatically mean they are ready. Readiness appears in what happens after the emotion settles. Will they communicate when the conversation becomes uncomfortable? Will they remain consistent when there is no dramatic moment pushing them forward? Will they respect your boundaries when patience is required? Will they continue choosing honesty when silence would be easier? Those are the questions their future actions would need to answer. And here is what makes your position powerful: you do not need to answer everything immediately. If they return, you are allowed to observe. You are allowed to listen without promising. You are allowed to notice whether their actions match their new awareness. Your heart does not have to rush simply because someone else finally became certain. Before you go further, hold on to that line. Their timing does not have to become your pressure. Perhaps the most beautiful possibility is not an instant reunion but an honest beginning, two people meeting again without pretending the past never happened, yet refusing to let it control every future moment. If that possibility speaks to you, you might share this message with someone walking through a similar season, leave a comment with the realization that stayed with you, and subscribe if you want to continue exploring these deeper turning points together. Because something has shifted again. While they have been imagining what they would say to you, another realization has surfaced: there is one thing they cannot ask you to give them immediately. Forgiveness may come slowly. Trust may return gradually. But there is something even more fundamental they know they must rebuild from the ground up: your belief that they will not disappear emotionally the moment things become complicated. That is why their next move, if it comes from genuine growth, may look surprisingly simple. A straightforward message. No dramatic promises. No attempt to force an outcome. Just honesty: I know things changed. I know I played a part in that. I would like to understand where you are now, if you're open to talking. Imagine the difference. No assumption that you belong to them. No demand that everything return to what it was. Just an invitation. Because they are finally learning that a healthy connection is not something one person captures. It is something two people consciously choose. And whether you choose it again will depend on what happens next, not what happened in their imagination. The future they once assumed was guaranteed has become uncertain, but perhaps uncertainty is exactly what has made them serious. Now they know that if another chapter opens, they cannot waste it. And there is still one realization ahead that could determine whether this becomes a reunion, a new beginning, or simply the closure that finally sets both hearts free. Here is the turn they never expected: the closer they come to reaching for you, the more they realize this cannot be about pulling you backward. It has to be about discovering whether the two of you can move forward. That difference may sound small, but inside them it feels enormous. For so long, their imagination was focused on recovering what existed before: the familiar conversations, the closeness, the feeling that you were somehow still within reach. Now they understand that the old version cannot simply be restored. Too much has been learned. You have changed. They have been forced to change. And if anything meaningful is going to happen between you again, it must begin from where you both stand now. Don't skip this moment, because their fear of losing you forever is beginning to transform into something far more useful than fear: responsibility. They are recognizing where they stayed silent when honesty was needed, where they waited when action mattered, and where they expected you to understand feelings they never clearly expressed. They cannot rewrite those moments. But they can decide whether they repeat them. And that is exactly what seems to be occupying their thoughts. They are no longer imagining some perfect sentence capable of solving everything instantly. They are thinking about what happens the day after the conversation. And the day after that. Because anyone can become emotional when they believe something precious is slipping away. The deeper test is whether that emotion becomes steady effort once the immediate urgency disappears. They know this now. They know you may be watching quietly, not testing them, not playing games, simply observing whether their behavior finally matches the person they claim they are becoming. And strangely, they seem prepared for that. Perhaps because they finally understand something they missed before: your caution would not necessarily mean rejection. It could simply mean wisdom. You have experienced enough uncertainty to know that beautiful words can create a beautiful evening, but only consistent actions can create a beautiful future. Stay till the end, because there is another realization forming beneath all of this. They have stopped imagining you as someone waiting to be chosen. They are beginning to see you as someone who is choosing too. You are choosing what kind of communication enters your life. You are choosing what kind of effort deserves your attention. You are choosing whether the connection feels peaceful enough to explore again. And suddenly the balance between you looks completely different. They cannot arrive and announce the future. They can only show you who they are now and allow you to decide what that means. That awareness has humbled them in a way distance alone never could. It is making them reconsider the small things they once overlooked. Answering instead of disappearing into thought. Speaking clearly instead of expecting you to interpret silence. Asking what you feel instead of assuming. Keeping a promise even when nobody is watching. These things may not look cinematic from the outside, yet they are exactly what creates the kind of relationship people spend years searching for. What if that is the extraordinary revelation hidden inside this entire journey? Perhaps the big moment was never supposed to be a dramatic return. Perhaps it is the moment someone finally understands that love becomes meaningful through ordinary consistency. A message when they said they would message. A conversation where both people feel heard. An apology that does not secretly demand immediate forgiveness. A promise made carefully because they intend to keep it. That is the future beginning to appear in their mind. And there is one image they cannot seem to shake, you standing in front of them, calm, no longer asking them to choose you. Somehow, that imagined version of you affects them more deeply than anything else. Because now they understand that your calm does not mean you stopped feeling. It means your feelings no longer control your standards. You can care and still require clarity. You can remember beautiful moments and still ask whether the future would truly be different. You can love someone and still choose yourself if the connection repeatedly asks you to live inside uncertainty. That is the version of you they may have to meet. And perhaps that is why they are becoming more careful about their next step. They know that approaching you only because they are lonely would eventually reveal itself. Approaching because their pride was challenged would reveal itself too. Even approaching because they simply missed the comfort you provided would not be enough. If they come forward, they need to know why. Not only, I don't want to lose you, but, I understand what building something with you requires, and I am willing to participate in that work. There is a world of difference between those two statements. One is fear speaking. The other is intention. And intention is where this story is heading. But there is still a question nobody can answer for them. Are they prepared to hear your truth even if it is not the truth they hoped for? Because working things out requires more than courage to speak. It requires courage to listen. You may tell them that you were hurt by the uncertainty. You may tell them you needed something they were not ready to give. You may tell them you still care but need time. You may even tell them that your understanding of the connection has changed. If they truly have grown, they will not punish you for being honest. They will respect your truth while expressing their own. That could be the clearest sign of transformation yet. Before you go, hear this line: someone being afraid to lose you is not the destination. Someone learning how to value you without needing the threat of losing you, that is where something real can begin. And they are approaching that lesson now. The fear that first made them look backward is slowly teaching them how to look forward. Not toward some guaranteed ending, but toward a possibility built with open eyes. They want to work this out. They are thinking more seriously about how. But the most surprising part is still ahead, because soon they must make a choice between continuing to rehearse the conversation inside their mind or finally allowing their actions to speak. And when that choice arrives, you may discover whether their silence was the end of your story together or merely the space before a completely different beginning.